Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video and talk about this subject that I thought would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, I believe, by that of Fight Hub TV. Little interesting interview by that of apparently Stephen Edwards, I believe either a boxing trainer or a boxing commentator, maybe both. I believe that his nickname is quote unquote Bread Man for, whatever reason, but I've not really known about this guy, but apparently this guy gives usually a lot of great analyzations, at least according to a lot of boxing fans. So I kind of wanted to review this video, especially because he's going to be talking about the up and coming fight, super fight, at least according to a lot of people, between that of Canelo Alvarez and Terence Bud Crawford. And first of all, I do apologize for not posting as many videos as of lately. There's just been a lot of stuff going on. First of all, with a lot of the editing that I've been doing with certain videos because it can take a very long time, and I'm still new to editing, so hopefully the quality is high enough for a certain amount of you guys. I've been trying on it very hard. And on top of that, I've also had to study for certain exams that I have to take very soon, so I do apologize for not posting as many videos. But since I have a little bit more time this week, I decided that I'm going to try to post several videos, of certain subjects, and not just in boxing, but also in the UFC as well, and maybe some other things as well. Maybe the French Open, if I have time, but we'll see. But anyways, I just thought that I would talk about this video because Stephen Edwards here, he had a very interesting analyzation about the up-and-coming Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Bud Crawford fight. And I've been stating now for years that if that fight ended up happening, that in my view, the fight, I don't think it would be relatively competitive, that I always thought that Canelo Alvarez would be very dominant in the fight. And I think that Terence Bud Crawford would not only figure out that he got a little bit, much of what he actually bargained for, but that he would be facing the fighter that would be hands down the most skilled fighter that he has ever fought. And I think that Crawford realizes that Canelo Alvarez is an all-time great skilled level fighter. If you listen to Crawford, the way that he explains about Canelo Alvarez, you'll know that Crawford has a great amount of respect for not only Canelo Alvarez for his career, but also his skill set. So you have a certain amount of these people overall that claim that Canelo Alvarez, that all he does is pressure and that he's one-dimensional. Crawford realizes that Canelo Alvarez is not a quote-unquote one-dimensional fighter. Now, that being stated, what I will state is this. In most recent years, do I believe that Canelo Alvarez has become a little bit more one-dimensional because of his age and his clear limitations, because he's starting to slow down as a fighter? Yes, personally, I do. And what I will state is this. The fight that once upon a time I seen as 80-20 or 70-30 going in Canelo Alvarez's favor, I now see almost about 50-50. And the reason why I state that is because I was not impressed with Canelo Alvarez's performance last time. And I've been stating now for the past few years that Canelo Alvarez has really looked older with each and every single fight, which of course is going to be somewhat natural. But once again, certain people don't understand because they take a look at Canelo Alvarez and they say, well, he's 35 years old. How can Canelo Alvarez be quote unquote that old? And Canelo Alvarez is only 35 years old. What a certain amount of people don't understand, a certain amount of people that don't understand the fight game, or a certain amount of people that don't understand athletics or sports in general, is that everyone ages differently. Not everyone is always going to last until they're 40 or 40-something years old, like a Manny Pacquiao or a Floyd Mayweather or a Bernard Hopkins. If you were to ask me who I think is the clear greater fighter in career over the other between Roy Jones Jr. and Bernard Hopkins, I would clearly say Roy Jones Jr., although a lot of people would disagree for whatever reason. But, and Bernard had a great career. But, Bernard Hopkins, although a lot of people love to use some of the age excuses whenever they say that, he lost some of the bigger fights in his career at an older age, keep in mind, Bernard Hopkins really didn't become a top 5 pound-for-pound guy or the debatably the number 1 pound-for-pound guy until he was in his late 30s. And then he really lasted and probably was, I'm not, if you don't want to say at a peak form, but at a very great form overall, even in his early 40s. That was pretty much the peak of Bernard Hopkins. The peak of Bernard Hopkins was in his late 30s to early 40s. That was his peak. Now, of course, that's not usually very natural. But the point being is that everyone ages a little bit differently. When you take a look at Alexander Usyk right now, he's 38 years old, but he has less wear and tear on himself than what a Terence Bud Crawford or a Canelo Alvarez have, which is why he was recently able to do what he was able to do even for his age. That's why Artur Beterbiev, even at 41 years old, I believe, as of right now, he can still give the decently younger Dimitri Bivol and some of these other champions a very rough time or stop them because, once again, Artur Beterbiev is a guy that, in terms of the professionals, he doesn't have that much wear and tear on him. Now, a certain amount of people may say, well, these guys fight in the amateurs, right? But you must understand that most amateur fights, or in the Olympics, when you're talking about it, these fights only last for 3 rounds. And the amateur fighting is a point-based system. It's not usually overall for who does the most amount of damage, it's for who does the most amount of points. It's different. Like if you talk about karate fighting or taekwondo or boxing or something like that, and that of the amateurs versus that of the pros, versus that of say UFC or something, that's who can do the most amount of damage or who overall, can, win in the best fashion. But when you talk about that, that is a complete point-based system. So although people do talk about the amateurs and it does give you a great amount of experience, it doesn't really put as much wear and tear on you as what a certain amount of people may actually, be led to believe. So that's why you have some of these guys like Usyk and Beterbiev and some of these guys lasting pretty well, although they'll have 300 plus amateur fights. Dimitri Bivol, and they'll be in their mid 30s or, their early 40s, and they still look at a peak point in their career because they don't have the wear and tear on themselves as what some of these other fighters may have, like a Crawford or a Canelo, who have been fighting for about, 17, 20 years in the pros. It's different. So, I mean, that's the reason why I state that. But, Stephen Edwards, he made some interesting points that I thought that I would talk about. If you're asking me who I would favor in this fight personally, I would favor that of a Canelo Alvarez, but ever so slightly. And if Crawford were able to win this fight, I wouldn't be surprised because Canelo Alvarez, and I've been stating this ever since the Jaime Munguia fight, in the Munguia fight, although he still did pretty well, he looked about 40 years old to me in that fight. And I stated that. And people, they came in my comment section saying, what are you talking about? You're hating all this other stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then once they finally seen the Edgar Berlanga fights and the William Skull fights, people are starting to finally see what I'm talking about. Canelo is nowhere near his peak form. Now, I don't think that Crawford is necessarily at his peak form either. But like I stated, if you're talking about, in my personal view, which fighter is at more of a good point in their career, I would say Terence Crawford. And certain people, once again, may not understand that, but I'll explain it as the video goes along. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what Stephen Edwards has to say.
What'd you think about Canelo's performance over William Skull? Crawford next.
I just think he's getting a little older, and he just like, man, I'm not going to chase this guy around the ring like that. The guy's Skull fought awful, man. That was a horrible.
Agreed. It was not a good performance whatsoever. And once again, what's the first thing that this man ended up saying? That Canelo Alvarez is getting a little bit older. Now, Canelo has always kind of had an issue with cutting off the ring, but I think that he got better at it, especially once he hit his early 30s and late 20s. But the thing is that, Canelo Alvarez, it's very obvious overall that he does not have the same ability as what he once did. And oftentimes the first thing to go, whatever sport you're playing, is oftentimes the legs. And you see that in whatever sport people play, like in basketball. If you have someone that's super athletic, they may not be going or penetrating to the rims quite as much, or they may not be able to do as many moves. They might be pump faking more. If you're taking a look overall at that of football, when it comes down to it, they may have a little bit more time of a hard time scrambling, when it comes down to it. Or their throws may even be a little bit more off because a lot of that throwing power or a lot of the accuracy also can come from the legs, Or when you talk about that of tennis, one thing I noticed about Djokovic when he started getting a little bit earlier, I remember when he lost, I think it was either in the third to last round or whatever it was. Can't remember if it was in the quarterfinals or the semifinals. I remember a couple of years ago when he lost to Yannick Sinner, and I've never seen Djokovic just completely dominated in the Australian Open the way that he was against Yannick Sinner. And the reason why is because his legs were done. Like he had no legs in that particular tournament. Yannick Sinner was running him all around the court, and that was the first time that I had ever seen Djokovic where he looked at that guy and said, I can't keep pace with this guy. And the reason why is because his legs were no longer as near as what they were. And in 2023, you can also take a look at it. That whole year, although he won 3 of the 4 main Grand Slams, he clearly was starting to decline a little bit as a player in that year. But anyway, but the point is that including in boxing and every other sport, a lot of the times the first thing to go is oftentimes the legs. And that's such a huge component because the legs is such a big part of your movement and how you're going to get around the ring and also how you're going to get around your field, whatever sport you may play.
Horrible performance. You know what I mean? I know some of it's on Canelo too, but
He said he thought he won.
yeah, I mean, what is he supposed to say? I don't ever want to see a guy like that fight again, man. I like boxing.
I agree with that. And William Skull, no offense against him, but he did a whole lot of running around the ring that night, not really doing a whole lot. And I've seen certain fighters, put on performances like that. It just is what it is. I mean, William Skull is a guy to where I think he even realized that, he's not a guy that is ever going to be on that level. And he may not say that, or he may not realize that consciously, but there's certain people that when you take a look at their ability, they can only win in their particular way. And William Skull, he comes across to me as a guy that I don't think that he's ever going to be an A-grade level skilled fighter. I just don't.
But that was bad.
And talk to us about the thin line between running and actual ring generalship. Where do you draw the line as a coach?
Ring generalship in boxing is a guy that's trying to apply his offense and score points and win the fight. A guy that's running is just simply trying to run the clock out. That's why it's called running. He's running the clock out just so he can get a decision and get a moral victory. He has no interest in scoring points and winning the fight. His only interest is not taking any punishment and not being hit at all. So he's
And I would somewhat agree with that assessment. I would say that the William Skull versus Canelo Alvarez fight, that's somewhat of an example of running. Now, a fight that I would say is not an example of running was the Canelo Alvarez versus Araceli Lara fight, which a lot of people, of course, wanted to claim was quote-unquote running. That was not running. What Lara was doing is that he was trying to find new positioning with his feet, give Canelo Alvarez different angles, and to set him off balance. And for a lot of the times, it ended up working, which is why Canelo Alvarez did not look good in that fight, because he still was kind of learning how to cut off the ring, at that particular time. And to fight an opponent like Araceli Lara, someone that not only has a great amount of amateur experience, but I think was like a silver medalist in the Olympics or something like that. I can't remember. But Lara, of course, comes from the Cuban boxing school. Lara was debatably the most skilled and most talented Cuban of his particular era. Debatably. Rigondeaux, of course, up there as well. But Lara, anyone who watched him fight, he gave everyone hell.
Willing to sacrifice all of his offense to win the fight just so he could say he didn't get knocked out. So what Shakur and Devin do, that's not running. That's boxing. Yeah. You know what I mean? It may not be. That's boxing. Yeah. You know what I mean? It may not be crowd friendly, but they're.
Well, Shakur Stevenson, in my view, he's not really what I would call a quote-unquote runner, but his most recent performances have not really been up to par of someone that really is quote-unquote expected to be a top 10 level pound-for-pound fighter. It's no offense against you. Let me also state this, because you have certain people, of course, that will go on, the extremes. And like I always say, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney, they oftentimes get criticized by a certain amount of fans, especially non-black fans, for quote-unquote being boring or runners. But oftentimes, more than not, they're just doing their job, and they are boxing to a very decent ability. It's just that they have more of a, kind of move in and out type of style. What I will state is this, though, however, you have a lot of fans, especially a lot of the, black boxing channels, or, a lot of the LDBC and new media channels. And by the way, this is no offense to them whatsoever, because there's a lot of good channels out there that are like that. But point being is that you have a lot of these guys that'll take it to the other extreme and say overall that, people are just hating on them because overall they're quote unquote black and all sort of stuff. Well, listen, it's not like Shakur Stevenson's most recent performances have been great. If we're going to be real about it, let's not sugarcoat things. Let's not, just pull the race card overall, because, that happens with a lot of black fighters. Now, if they're putting on a great performance like what Mayweather did against Canelo Alvarez, and, then it's called running, then of course I get it. Then of course we have to take a look at that with a different standard. But Shakur Stevenson barely throwing any punches in the Edwin De Los Santos fight, and, also still not being able to stop certain guys like Artem Harutyan or whatever the fuck his name was, and taking 9 rounds to stop Joshua Padley. I mean, at the end of the day, give me a fucking break. He is going to get criticism for that, and it is somewhat going to be warranted. And Devin Haney overall did not have the best performance over Ryan Garcia, and he also didn't look super impressive over Jose Ramirez. I'm not going to claim that he ran in that fight necessarily, but it definitely was not, a super impressive outing. But that being stated, Devin Haney, I think that he's still getting over the demons of the Ryan Garcia fight.
Boxing. They're landing punches. They're hitting you more than you're hitting them. They're applying point scoring while they're just not taking a lot of punches. What William Skull was doing, he was running around the ring just like waiting for the rounds to end just so he can go 12 rounds and just say, That was a little different. And I like boxers personally, but that was bad.
Canelo
There's no
Crawford now.
difference, but I'm sorry. There's no difference between what Skull did and what Haney did.
No. I knew Haney was winning his fight, and I knew Skull was losing his. From the outside looking in, I said Haney's winning every round. When I was looking at Skull, I'm like, does he really think he winning this fight? So, no.
And what the guy basically asked there is that because a lot of the boxing media, they don't really take a look at much of a difference of what Devin Haney did and William Skull did. And listen, what I'm going to state is this. I get it. Because Devin Haney did not put on an impressive performance. It's not like it was his performance against Regis Prograis where he was staying on the outside and moving around the ring, but he was being very dominant in the fight. It had like one of the lowest, thrown percentages, I believe, or one of the least amount of thrown punches for, a fight with two former champions. The fight was fucking awful. So at the end of the day, let's not just sugarcoat things overall because Devin Haney is a high-level fighter, or because you're trying to protect a quote-unquote black fighter. And I'm not stating that that's what Stephen Edwards is doing, but you have a lot of channels or a lot of people that are doing that because, of course, once again, a lot of the times black fighters may go through double standards and they get labeled as boring, even though they may be fighting in a particularly, great way or, they may be doing what's best for them. But Devin Haney did not put on a super-duper impressive performance. So it just is what it is.
It's not. Devin's performance, and it was not a great performance, but it was still better than that.
Canelo Crawford now. What do you think? Obviously, Crawford.
I would agree with that.
Always like Crawford. Always like Crawford in the fight. I think Crawford's going to win.
He's gonna pull it off.
Yeah.
You think he's gonna be like just? Well, what's gonna be?
I just think he's just going to be too much.
A lot of people are changing their opinion.
I always said it. I always said I like Crawford from the very beginning of the fight.
You think he can hurt him?
Yep. Anybody could be hurt in the fight. Canelo got a great chin, though. But anybody could be hurt on any given night. Don't ever think a guy can't be hurt, man. Ever think some of the best chins I've ever seen have been clipped. Holyfield, Duran, anybody could be clipped, man. Anybody could get hurt. Anybody could go down. It can happen to anybody. Don't ever believe that.
And that's very true. But the question is about Terence Bud Crawford is he really going to be able to hurt Canelo Alvarez to the ability that he really wants to hurt him? Now, if he hits him repeatedly, to the point to where it's obvious that, he's hitting him with, say, 10 to 15, solid good power shots per round, and it's landing on Canelo Alvarez flushed, and yeah, maybe I could see a stoppage, or maybe I could see overall the knockdown ended up happening. But if he's barely able to hit Canelo Alvarez, or, not able to hit him flush, but maybe is outpointing him to a slight degree, I just don't see Crawford being able to stop Canelo. And Canelo Alvarez is someone that, when you take a look at him, Canelo Alvarez doesn't even just have a chin. Like, he has probably the greatest chin that I've ever seen for any other all-time great fighter that I've ever seen. It might even be greater than that of Marvin Hagler's.
What do you think about the layoff?
And talking about Roberto Duran and also that of Evander Holyfield, you definitely did see those guys get hurt, and I'm not trying to in any way claim that, once again, Canelo can't get hurt. But if we also take a look at Evander Holyfield, although he was very talented, and that's why when you get a certain amount of these guys claiming, like, I remember I reviewed a video by Aki TV, and he was trying to make the point, well, how can we put Usyk above certain all-time great heavyweights when he wouldn't even beat that of Evander Holyfield? Like, bro, Evander Holyfield was not this spotless fighter. Evander Holyfield, to be quite honest with you, for those of you that remember, he was known for sometimes getting into brawls and getting hit way, way, way too often. Like, if you guys remember his fight against Burt Cooper, a guy that pretty much was a brawler, I believe, back in the 90s and 80s, like Evander Holyfield damn near got knocked out against him. Now, of course, Burt Cooper could throw, he could punch for sure, but he was not an elite level fighter. So, it is what it is. So, if you're asking me personally who I believe is actually all around more skilled between Usyk and Holyfield, it's Usyk, no question. But, it is what it is. But Holyfield, of course, was an all-time great skilled level fighter as well, but just not on the same level as some of those other guys. And as for Roberto Duran definitely got clipped, sure, but a lot of the times Duran got hurt was more than likely because he really didn't belong at that natural weight class. Keep in mind that Duran was a guy that really could have fought at 135 for his whole entire career, but he decided to move up to 147, I believe, won the belt there over Sugar Ray Leonard, and then, of course, won a belt, I believe, at 154 and at 160. So Duran, of course, for his size, all-time great level fighter for what he was able to do. Now, he did kind of still lose a lot of the bigger fights, when he still moved up in weight, but the fact that he was still able to do what he was able to do is phenomenal.
Crawford.
Yeah.
It's always affected.
It's
It's always affected, but every time he lays off, he never looks rusty.
stays in the gym.
Yeah, it's
Never out of
kind.
shape,
He's
that's
one of
for
them
sure.
guys that never look rusty. So I don't really. It applies to a lot of fighters, but he defies the logic behind that because he don't look rusty with his layoffs.
Well, we'll see about that because Terence Crawford, in my view, in his performance against Islam Madrimov, he was not super impressive. Now, I mean, there's kind of a new array of, European fighters that, have fast feet, and they kind of like to move around the ring and give you awkward angles like the Karen Chukachan or, the Israel Madrimov type of fighters, whatever they are. But those guys are never going to be legit, long lasting champions because, they just have that certain thing missing. Now, if you're talking about guys like Vasyl Lomachenko or Alexander Usyk or something like that, those are guys that, pretty much have the all-around package. But if you're talking about guys like Israel Madrimov, he just didn't really have a great multitude of ways in order to beat Crawford. And he was just way, way, way too tentative in certain moments and was kind of having his offense be a little bit too repetitive. And even then, he did make some slight adjustments and he made the fight very close. It was about 7 rounds to 5. And that was with Crawford outlengthening him by about, I believe, 6 inches or 5 inches in terms of reach. So, I mean, we'll see. But, like I said, Crawford did look a little bit rusty in his last fight, and I'm not sure how the gain weight is really going to help him, if Canelo Alvarez especially is able to get on him early. I stated that in my view that Terence Crawford, that the worst thing for him to do would to actually try to be in the fight at about 185 pounds. But it might actually benefit him the way that I've seen Canelo Alvarez look in his last fight. Canelo looked slow in his last fight. I mean, he looked damn slow.
What makes him so special?
Oh man, I don't think you got enough time in the interview, man. But he seems to have like a very fast processing mind. He can seem to adjust to anything. He's like a savant in a boxing ring. He probably can't even explain how he adjusts to everything, but can just adjust to anything in the fight. He's a great fighter.
That happens a lot with boxing geniuses or a lot with geniuses in whatever craft that they may do, especially under pressurized situations. They can't necessarily explain what they're doing in the moment, but they can just kind of do it. It's kind of just like a natural instinctive thing.
You feel like he's got any advantages early over Canelo?
Sure, better stamina, better conditioning, better feet. I think obviously Canelo's the harder puncher, probably the stronger guy. But I think he has more dexterity, more agility. He's going to be better in the later rounds. He's a little taller. His arms are longer. I think he got a lot of.
Now, if you notice a lot of the things what he stated actually were not skill based. Once again, when people, if you were to ask people overall that actually know boxing, what are the true advantages that Terence Crawford has over Canelo Alvarez, at least that they're both at their best? Once again, a lot of those advantages are going to be physical based. They're going to be reach or height or stamina, or certain things like that, better dexterity, certain things like that. But if you talk about certain skill set, Canelo Alvarez, there are certain things that he is better at than Terence Crawford, at least at his absolute best. Now, it's a little bit harder overall at this day and age because Canelo is, he's clearly just aging as a fighter. I mean, Crawford is as well, but I think that Canelo has more wear and tear on him. But the thing is that Canelo Alvarez, if we were to compare skill for skill, Canelo Alvarez does have better upper body movement than Terence Crawford. He does. And if you're asking me overall what I actually believe is the better skill to learn between better feet, at least in terms of quicker feet or upper body movement, in my personal view, it's upper body movement. Now, having great feet can be a very great advantage because it can put you in certain, positions and put you at certain angles to where, it's going to be advantageous for you. But the reason why Canelo Alvarez can beat fighters that outlengthen him or outheighten him sometimes by even several inches, or at least by a few inches, like Caleb Plant or Danny Jacobs or sometimes Gennady Golovkin. I mean, some of those fighters didn't outlengthen him by several inches. But even guys like Callum Smith or Sergey the Crusher Kovalev, the reason why he can beat certain guys like that is because Canelo Alvarez has such upper body movement. He has such great upper body movement. He can slip very well. He defends extraordinarily well. And when we talk about both Canelo Alvarez's and also Crawford's defensive responsibility and upper body movement, Canelo has the advantage in both of those areas, at least at his best. Now, the problem is that Canelo's upper body movement and his defense has obviously declined in most recent years. So the question is it going to be enough of an advantage for Canelo Alvarez to really beat Crawford? Because in order for him to beat Crawford, he's going to have both of those things. So I don't know. We'll see.
Do you see any point in the fight where Crawford not being able to hurt Canelo, just gets walked down. That's been the consensus overall before Canelo's last fight. A lot of people saying that Crawford may be able to do something early, but there's going to be a point where he gets hit, gets
I
hurt.
disagree with that. I think Crawford's going to be the stronger fighter in the later rounds. I think the early part of the fight is where he got to be careful at. I think the early.
Well, let me state this, because I think what a lot of people are thinking overall in this fight is that, well, Canelo Alvarez, he's the guy that, if he, he's going to slow down clearly in the later rounds. Canelo is not a guy overall that is just an early starter. Canelo Alvarez is a guy that, if you actually know anything about his career, he's a very late starter. He's not a guy that usually gets better until about some of the mid to later rounds. Now, that can be very dangerous, but the same thing about Terence Crawford is that he also can be a little bit of a late starter. So both fighters are going to have to be very careful, especially with Crawford, with him gaining all that weight. It's going to be very particularly interesting. I'm not really quite sure, what's going to end up happening, but it's going to be very, very, very particularly interesting. And I want to see how Crawford reacts with all that added weight, because it does appear that he has bulked up quite a bit. And I know that certain people may say that that is to his advantage, but when you're in the ring against a championship level fighter, even at his age against Canelo Alvarez, it's completely different, because you've never felt that level of power before. Now, I understand that, Crawford, that he's fighting guys that, at times are middleweights or super middleweights, but those guys are not going full force on you, bro. Like fighters always love to, brag about this stuff about, I'm sparring with heavyweights and sparring, blah, 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 all sort of stuff. Right, but those guys are not going full force on you. Because if they were going full force on you, either A, you're going to get knocked out or very badly damaged in all your full efforts. It's just not possible. So, I mean, Crawford can talk all this shit that he wants to, but those super middleweights are not going full force against you. I mean, come on. This is what it is.
Part of the fight, he could get clipped if he's not careful. But I think the later rounds, I think he functions better in the later rounds than Canelo does.
You could definitely debate that, but I think that Canelo Alvarez also functions pretty good in the late rounds, but it depends which version of Canelo you're going to get. And unfortunately, once again, Canelo Alvarez, he has gotten a little bit worse in the latter rounds most recent years, because he's just clearly aging as a fighter. He doesn't have the same gas tank as what he once did, and Canelo has never had a great gas tank, to be honest with you, but he has an even worse gas tank than what he used to. And then on top of that, he's just clearly slower and nowhere near to what he once was. But we'll see overall, once again, what ends up happening. And Crawford may not be anywhere near what he once was either. Because once again, I was not super impressed with his last outing, but that could have been more of a stylistic matchup. So it's kind of hard to say where Crawford is going to be at in terms of this fight. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, can you jump in my truck and get a wristband?
Around than Canelo does.
It's gonna be a great fight. Anything you're looking forward to that you want to talk about? Or
Karan Davis has a great fight versus you.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it overall for this video. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. But I don't think that overall he had a complete bad analyzation. There are certain things to where I can definitely see where he's coming from. But once again, Canelo Alvarez, it's going to be interesting to see where he's at. If he's maybe a little bit sharper or better against a smaller fighter. But that can even be a disadvantage, because at times that fighter is quicker than a lot of the bigger opponents that you're used to facing. But we'll see. I don't know. This is a fight that really could go either way. But it also depends on Terence Crawford, how good his stamina and how good his power is, depending with the gain weight, because that's not always a good idea. But we'll see. But, we've seen fighters do it overall that would gain muscle mass, of 20 pounds. And, like a Roy Jones Jr. did it against John Ruiz. But, of course, John Ruiz was pretty much known as the weakest heavyweight champion at that time. It's not like he did that against Lennox Lewis. But Canelo Alvarez, he's not as big against Crawford as what some people are trying to make it out to be. Don't get it twisted. Crawford, of course, he could be potentially 20 pounds lighter than Canelo when they're both at their natural weight. But the thing is that, if somehow the weight does work out for Crawford, then Crawford is taller and lengthier than Canelo. So we'll see what happens. But this is going to be a fight that's going to be very interesting. It could go either way, but, it's just unfortunate, because I don't think that either fighter is really at the absolute peak of their career. But we'll see what ends up happening. It's going to be interesting. But, the factors for me will be if Canelo Alvarez can establish overall, great upper body movement, how well he can cut off the ring. And if Crawford, if he is able to sustain that added weight, and if he is able to sustain some level of speed, because he's going to have to against Canelo Alvarez. If he's not, if he doesn't overall have the speed advantage over Canelo Alvarez, and he's clearly more lethargic than what he once was because of the added weight, that's going to be a huge problem. Even for Canelo Alvarez at his age, he's someone that is still very powerful, and he's someone overall that can put a lot of damage on you. So we'll see. And he's still someone that can box relatively well, although, of course, he's not anywhere near what he once was. But we'll see. That pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see where this goes. But in terms of the statement, do I believe that Crawford will be stronger in the later rounds? I mean, he might be stronger in the latter rounds, especially against Canelo Alvarez at this point in time. But we'll see, because that added weight will be an interesting factor. But this is a fight that truly could go either way, looking at Canelo Alvarez in his most recent fights. But we'll see. That pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.